It is Monday, December 9th, 2024. It is almost 1 o'clock, about 12:58 p.m. I'm your host, 7 News political analyst Justin Allen Rose, and this is For the Record. Over the weekend, I was thinking about ways that I could really spruce up this podcast for the record. And that's because I really want this podcast to not just be a stagnant thing or anything of those of that sort. More or less, I really want this podcast to provide a service for all of you. And with that being said, I just don't want to do one podcast a week. I really do believe that having different kind of segments throughout the week would help really improve upon the knowledge that people have in Southwest Oklahoma about what's actually going on in the state legislature, what's actually happening within the politics of the Sooner State. And that's because, like I mentioned a little bit ago in a separate podcast episode, I understand why people don't want to do this sort of research. I completely understand it. You're working 8, 12-hour shifts in a factory or wherever you work out. And the last thing you want to do is come home. I mean, especially those that have a family, children, a spouse, what have you. You work 12 hours. You don't want to come home, blow off your spouse, blow off your kids, and then go on the computer and instantly start researching politics, especially the nitty gritty of politics, to fully understand what is going on. And that's why I'm here. Yes, I have a wife, a beautiful daughter, what have you. And sorry, wife, sorry, my beautiful daughter, but I do love to research this. And sometimes I do come home. And while I do play with my daughter after she goes to bed and my wife, does her thing on Hulu, watches her shows, what do? I research politics. And so I can be that kind of eyes and ears for all of you out there. I can research this stuff. I do it throughout the day and what have you. And so with that being said, all that round up into one little sort of monologue, I have a plan. And that plan is release an episode on Mondays, release an episode on Wednesdays, and then release an episode on Fridays. Monday, today, will kind of be a fun segment, a fun episode. And those will generally be me just scrolling through the timelines, the social media timelines of those in power in Oklahoma. And that will help us kind of fully understand what they are trying to say to you, the Oklahoman voter or the Oklahoma resident, the Oklahoma citizen, even. And so we get to see what they're trying to tell you. But at the same time, we also get to kind of deep dive into maybe analyze what they're trying to do. What kind of messages are they trying to send the people to one, either get reelected or to get certain policies passed? And if you're wondering why can I, me personally, Justin Allen Rose, produce that for all of you to try to analyze these things? Well, that's exactly what I got my PhD in, was American political science, one political science degree I got from the University of Tennessee, but I mainly focus on media in the American political context. That's what my dissertation was over. In particular, was over social media effects. One, how social media affects how people evaluate political actors and political parties, but also how social media affects political emotions in the average day social media user, you and I. And so one, I have that background, and also I also researched, political campaign strategy in my own time during my PhD studies because I find it very interesting, especially political images that people are trying to instill, or political frames even that politicians are trying to instill in the users or in the viewers of their message. So I'm excited. I am really excited about these new things. And if you're wondering about what the Wednesday podcasts are going to be, come back on Wednesday and you'll be able to see what those Wednesday podcast episodes are going to be. But on Friday, if you don't already know, Fridays are going to be kind of a week in review. The top political stories of the day, we'll look into it and we'll try to delve into how are these affecting the political landscape and what are those in power trying to do. So with that being said, let me go ahead and share my screen. And you'll be able to immediately, or let me go back here. there we go. And you'll be able to see me on the, oh, you'll be able to see me on the screen as well. That is perfect. And so you can see we're looking at Kevin Stitt's X account. And there's kind of a method to this madness that I am going to do. So first and foremost, we're going to look at Kevin Stitt. He's the governor of Oklahoma. You can might as well think of him as the president of Oklahoma. So of course we got to view his X account. Then we're going to look at Lonnie Paxton. Lonnie Paxton, if you do not know, he's a pro tem elect pretty much. He's going to be the Senate pro tem in these upcoming session in the Oklahoma legislature. So basically, he's a top ranking, let's say, Republican in the Senate side. Then we're going to look at the top Senate Democrat, which is Julia Kurt. And then we're going to look into Kyle Hibbert, who is going to be the Speaker of the House, so the top Republican in the House. And then we're going to look at the top Democrat in the House, of course, Cindy Munson, who is also from the Lawton area. And then we're also going to take a very brief look at the Oklahoma House Democratic Caucus, so the full Democratic picture in the House, and then the full Senate picture. We'll move the Senate picture first for the Republicans. So we're going to see with the Republican side, the actual Senate, the House, the GOP in the House, what are they saying as a whole, in terms of the messaging they are trying to get across. So let's go back to Kevin Stitt. Let's just scroll through and see what he's talking about. And so first thing on Monday, we see that he tweeted out or posted on X, "Meet my new Secretary of Energy and Environment, Jeff Starling. He's an Oklahoma First energy leader who knows how to unleash our potential. Most importantly, he'll make sure Oklahoma continues to fuel America." It's interesting that this is the tweet that we first see. Because if you don't know, I think it was last week and maybe a little bit late the week prior than last week, we saw that Oklahoma entered into an MOU with Denmark. And we saw a lot of pushback, especially from the far-right conservative crowd pertaining to this MOU. Because it had to do, or at least if you looked at the MOU, basically had to do a little bit with solar energy. And as we should know, the farther-right crowd in American politics has been very pushing back against solar energy in favor, of course, oil and gas, especially here in Oklahoma, which a lot of people say oil and gas runs Oklahoma. And so we saw instantly a very strong pushback against this MOU that Stitt really pushed forward, I would say. And so because of this, we saw the Oklahoma Freedom Caucus, which is, I would say, the farthest right that we have in Oklahoma. And again, a lot of people think when you watch the mainstream media, when people say far right, it's typically an insult. That's how I'm using it. I'm just saying it in terms of a layout of the political landscape. We have farther left individuals, we have moderate, we have middle of the ground in terms of left and right. And then, of course, we have farther right. It's just in terms of the political ideology. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm not saying it's a good thing. I'm just commenting on where they would land in terms of a left-right continuum on political ideology. And that Oklahoma Freedom Caucus, and they would probably agree with me. I would be shocked if they didn't, that they are safely on the farther right side of the political spectrum. And they really push forward. They released a statement. And if you don't know, the Freedom Caucus is basically they're trying to get to every 50 state to really affect the policies of every 50 states to make sure that policies in every 50 state goes a little bit more farther to the right. And so that's exactly what they're doing here in Oklahoma as well. And so they reached out and they released a statement pretty much urging caution to this sort of MOU because they don't want to anger oil and gas here in Oklahoma. And again, not saying that because of money being given out or what have you. No, it's just, it could be if you want to take everybody, on the up and up, it could be just because they believe that oil and gas was best for Oklahoma. And in response, if I'm not mistaken, Kevin Stitt actually, just recently, let's look it up real quick. And so we're going to look at the Oklahoma Freedom Caucus's X account. Right here. It says, and I quote, and this is from the Oklahoma Freedom Caucus's chair, Shane Jett. He says, quote, "Yesterday, I had a very productive conversation with Governor Stitt. We are in agreement that climate change cult ideology has no place in Oklahoma's all of the above energy policy. We'll continue to work together to always put Oklahoma first and be ever vigilant to keep any leftist infiltrators from infecting our state. And so they were genuinely worried, I would say, the Oklahoma Freedom Caucus, of this MOU with Denmark will allow for, in their eyes, far left policies, energy policies like the Green New Deal is what they would equate it to, would creep into Oklahoma policy as it relates to energy policy. And I'm telling you, a lot of people are pushing back. I mean, even some comments that we received on the stories that we published about this MOU with Denmark basically said to the greatest extent that Oklahoma, this conservative state, should not be entering into agreements with socialist countries like Denmark. And so this engendered a whole lot of pushback. But as we can see, Governor Stitt has done some work to try to not be outflanked, I would say, by that far-right crowd and make sure that, or at least in his eyes and in the Oklahoma Freedom Caucus eyes, make sure that it at least appears that Kevin Stitt is on that side of the oil and gas and not in any sense of the word, I should say, in conjunction or on the side of the Green New Deal or anything of the sorts. And so still looking at Kevin Stitt's X account, we see that he's pushing forward a give a ham challenge, but that's not really what I'm interested in. We can see he's commented on some of the McGirt's decisions in past, so he's not giving that up. We still see him, I don't know if it's right to say butting heads with the native tribes of Oklahoma anymore. We do see that every now and then, but he has been entering into new compacts with those. So that has kind of died down from earlier in the year, which there was a lot of butting of the heads, I would say, earlier this year, but that has since, at least a little bit, dodged down a little bit. Interesting. We even see on December 5th that Governor Kevin Stitt reposted a tweet from Nathan Dahm. If you don't know who Nathan Dahm is, he's no longer in the Oklahoma legislature. He was term limited out, but pretty much he was granted the title of Oklahoma's most conservative legislator. And he tweeted out this: we need an OK Dodge. If you don't know Dodge, pretty much a governmental accountability system to try to gut government waste is what they're trying to say here. There are over 500 state agencies, boards, commissions, etc. Time to cut the government fat. And this, again, is coming from Nathan Dahm. He's saying time to cut the government fat and let the free market work in Oklahoma. Governor Stitt has work to deregulate, but there's still more to be done. And in response, Governor says, couldn't agree more. Buckle up with those eyes emojis. So it seems like they are kind of taking the language, the framing from those at the very, very top of the Republican Party nationally. President Trump, Vivek Ramaswamy, and Elon Musk taking that sort of language and applying it to right here in Oklahoma. It's going to be interesting to really see what this notion of buckle up means. Are we going to see more cuts? Are we going to see more tax cuts? Are we going to see some sort of agencies go away? And how would that affect everyday Oklahomans? Is it going to make life better? Is it going to free up more tax dollars to be poured toward education or things that Oklahomans care about? What is going to take place? It's going to be very interesting to see. And very lastly, before we go over to Lonnie Paxton and then Julia Court to kind of get a dueling X look at in terms of the Senate side, Republican and Democrat, let's look at this last tweet or last post. I keep saying tweet, but last post for Governor Stitt. Operation Guardian is catching steam. Even blue state governors are on the same page here. It's just common sense. That was a post from Kevin Stitt. And again, if you're listening to this, if you're watching a video, you'll be able to see the tweets that I'm talking about in real time. And so Operation Guardian is this new thing that Kevin Stitt is pushing forward and basically says once Trump takes office, is put into place, what have you, he's already elected, once he actually gets into the White House itself, then this policy is pretty much will be able to start here in Oklahoma. And his Operation Guardian basically says any illegal immigrants that are within our justice system, meaning behind bars in prison, they are pretty much going to get kicked out of the country. They're going to get placed back across the border, essentially. And so it's going to be very interesting to see if this takes place in terms of the blue governments he's talking about. It was in response to this another post. And this post states that liberal New York State Governor Kathy Hochul now says she will call ICE to deport illegal immigrants who break the law. And so he's saying that and honestly, I mean, the southern border was a huge, huge topic when it came to this presidential election. So it's not a surprise that in states like New York and states like Oklahoma, we're seeing some congruence in terms of policies that they're trying to implement because they're trying to appeal to the average, say, American. And it does seem like, at least, this sort of language, I won't say policies, but at least this language is winning in terms of framing. That it seems like the more pro public safety and pro criminal justice and trying to keep those criminals at bay, that sort of line of framing is going to win out. And so it's not surprising to me that we're seeing, state governor of New York and the state governor of Oklahoma seeing some congruence in policies as it relates to illegal immigrants, especially those illegal immigrants who have been arrested for certain crimes. But let's jump over to the Senate now. Leaving Oklahoma Governor Kevin Stitt behind, now let's look at Lonnie Paxton. And we're going to quickly sort of see that some Republicans and some Democrats are either a little bit more active or not active at all on social media. And that's interesting in itself to see because we have Lonnie Paxton here, who is about to be pro tem of the Oklahoma Senate. He's not that active on X. We see some posts from November 13th, almost a full month ago. It basically is just kind of a reposting of press releases sent by the Oklahoma Senate detailing certain new senators taking oaths and people being placed into positions of power in terms of the committee that Paxton himself basically gets to contribute to. So we're not seeing too many things really here that catching my eye pretty much. Ooh, what was that real quick? Nah, thought I saw something different, but I did not see that. Yeah, and this last tweet came about 5 days ago, December 4th. Today, I announced, this is him, Lonnie Paxton, this post from December 4th. Today, I announced the committee chairs and vice chairs of the Oklahoma Senate GOP who will help move our state forward. These are individuals who are committed and ready to do meaningful work on behalf of Oklahomans. I am excited to get to work. One thing that this does tell me, though, that he's trying to put together a package for anybody who's looking at his X account, and he might not think a lot of people do. I mean, how many followers does he have? 577, not too bad, more than me. But basically, he's trying to put together a sort of package, letting people know, hey, the Oklahoma GOP together is working together to move our state forward, to do meaningful work, to do work on the behalf of the blue-collar Oklahoman, we might as well say. So not a lot of things to really report from this one. But like I mentioned, we're going to see sometimes senators are really active or certain legislators are really active on social media and others are not at all. Julia Kurt, on the other hand, in comparison to Lonnie Paxton, very, very active, I would say, on X. And so let's look at our bio, actually. Let's look at Julia Kurt's bio, Senator Kurt's bio. She says she's an Oklahoma Senate Democratic leader, Oklahoma City, Bethany Award Acres, letting people know who she represents, and also lets people know what she is working toward as a legislator, and also as a Democratic legislator at that. Thriving Oklahomans, mental health, public education, and an economy working for all. Again, she wants thriving Oklahomans, mental health, public education, and an economy working for all. So let's see how her posts really follow that. And she has a lot of followers. 5,971. So this is a X account that should see a lot of movement. Now she doesn't pay for Twitter Blue or X Blue. I know I keep calling it Twitter. I'll get over that whole Twitter thing eventually. But the first thing she talks about is this is a repost from her. It states that most local tax systems are falling short of their potential. The tax revenue sources most used by local governments tend to disproportionately weigh on households with fewer resources. Here we explore how local governments raise revenue across the U.S. And this is just a repost from a different X account. She also talks about how she talked to an attorney last night. This was posted on December 6th, who attended an eviction docket in Oklahoma County with 400 cases. Each case couldn't take more than 20 seconds or the judge got mad. 20 seconds, y'all, to consider if someone should stay in their home. So she's highlighting what she is doing, where she is going to try to fight for the everyday Oklahoman. I would say this is a very, very good use of X, and especially if you are the minority party. And I do think, personally, I know I talked to Alicia Andrews in the last podcast about if Oklahoma Democrats have an image problem. I just think Democrats as a whole have an image problem. The party does. And again, yes, we did see the Oklahoma Democratic Party did not lose a seat that they held, but also they were incumbency seats. Now, not every person running in those incumbency seats were incumbents. There were those, because incumbents, of course, eventually turned them out in Oklahoma, but there was still the party holding control of that seat. So I would say there was still sort of that incumbency advantage intrinsically within that, running for a seat that your party is already holding. But with that being said, I still do think the Democrats have an image problem. You ask any person walking the street almost here at Lawton, and I guarantee you, you ask them, hey, which party is more fighting for the average day person? I guarantee you maybe 8 out of 10 would say the Republican Party. Now, that could be bias, self-induced bias on their part, because they're probably registered Republicans, so they automatically kind of get that confirmation bias. But also, I mean, you can look at the messaging. I don't think the National Democratic Party had a very well-received message this last presidential cycle, like a lot of people are saying. Nothing new that I'm saying. A lot of people are saying this, but it does have an effect on those down ballot races, and also in states like Oklahoma, because Oklahoma is such a red state. I mean, all 77 counties voted in favor of red, in favor of Donald Trump in this past election, which was the same in 2016 and the same in 2020. But in this state particularly, when you have a national party who is looked upon as very elitist, very coastal, I mean, in Oklahoma, the very middle of the country, it's not going to bode well for those running under that Democratic banner. Because again, yes, like Alicia Andrews says, you vote for who you know. And so these Democrats can run all day long, can run 5 times in a row. We saw that with Larry Bush here in Lawton. He ran like 5 different races so far. He lost every single one of them. And so it's going to take more than voting for who you know. You're going to have to combine that with a great, great image. While it might not come from the National Democratic Party, the Oklahoma Democratic Party can really make that switch for themselves, really separate themselves from the national Democratic picture through the use of social media platforms. It can be done. Will it be hard? And will it probably anger some of those in the National Democratic platform? Of course it will. But at some point, when you're so far in the minority in terms of the legislature, you're going to have to decide for yourselves whether or not angering certain people in those high up offices, it's okay to do, because it's going to be okay for the Oklahoman people. If you're the Democratic Party, if you believe that Oklahoman Democrats have those policies that will have a good effect on those average day Oklahomans, on the vast majority of Oklahomans in comparison to, let's say, Republican policy. Not saying that's the case, just saying, let's say this is the case. They fully believe that. Then it should also follow that you getting elected to office, you obtaining a majority in the legislature, will lead to better policy outcomes as well. So you must do everything possible to get elected in order to do right for the people of Oklahoma in your view. And so with that being the case, you have to come up with that decision. Do we anger people in the DNC, the national DNC, separate ourselves from the DNC to once again possibly become the majority party in Oklahoma? We'll see if that takes place. But again, Julia Kurt does a really good job, I would say, on social media, really highlighting, data. But again, that also gets into the notion, let's say, people who look at Julia Kurt's timeline. I mean, this appeals to me, to be honest with you, not saying because Republican, Democrat, what have you, but just because data. I love data. I'm a political scientist. I love data, especially quantitative data that I can sink my teeth into and see this increased by 5 points, this subtracted by 10 points, whatever it may be. I love data. And so Julia Kurt, Senator Kurt, posting a lot of data does well for me, makes me want to click into those articles that get deep into those policy discussions. But those people who you need to reach, the average say Oklahomans that you need to win back over, I don't know if a article from Yale.edu is going to appeal to them. And it gets into that whole elitist stance. Again, does this make the Democratic Party feel a little bit more educational elite? That's another thing that people are talking about in this last election, is that we are seeing a educational divide. Those with college degrees tend to vote more democratically, and those with lesser off are just plain high school degrees. I shouldn't say lesser off at all, but those with high school degrees, they tend to vote more Republican. And so is that adding into this whole notion of Julia Kurtz sharing this new research? This is the title of the article that she reposted. New research sheds light on the economic consequences of evictions. And so, I mean, this is a policy that affects the lowest socioeconomic individuals who are in with that lowest socioeconomic threshold, or within that group, the lowest socioeconomic group. And so it does affect them. So she's showing that she is at least looking at policy that's affecting hardworking Oklahomans, you can say. But again, I don't know if sharing, wrapping this message up in a Yale article, and then you post new research that's light on just reposting the headline. I don't know if this is going to reach a whole lot of people and making them believe that, let's say, just making that switch of the image of the Oklahoma Democratic Party to, hey, the party of hardworking Oklahomans. Again, this appeals to me because it's data, and I want to learn more about data, so you're going to catch my interest a little bit more. But I don't know those who are just scrolling through X after a hardworking day, looks at this and wants to click on it and wants to learn more about Kurt and the policies that she's trying to get passed that deals with evictions, that probably are issues that a lot of these people who are scrolling through X are dealing with to this day. If it's not them, they know somebody else dealing with it, or they know their mother, their grandmother, or their friend from high school, what have you. And so it's going to be interesting to see whether or not, especially gearing up for this 2026. I know it's 2 years away, but I mean, these elections start now. It's going to be interesting to see if these messages change as we get a little bit closer to the governor's race in 2026. But switching pace now from the Senate to the Oklahoma House, we're looking at Kyle Hilbert's X account, who is the speaker-elect for the Oklahoma House of Representatives, going to be the top Republican in the House, the top GOP representative. His pinned post, this is what it says: largest tax cut in state history took effect in August, reducing Oklahomans' grocery bills by 4.5%. The first post you see of Kyle Hilbert's, the top GOP representative in the House, is one saying they're reducing Oklahomans' grocery bill. That's perfect. I mean, honestly, from a person who, if I'm just analyzing this, if I am wanting to automatically change, let's say somebody's coming with a blank slate, wanted to look at the Republicans versus Democrat. This is exactly what I would, if I was a Republican strategist and I was trying to craft somebody's social media timeline, this is be one of the first tweets, the pinned tweet that I would want to see. Letting those average day Oklahomans know, hey, I had an effect. At least the GOP had an effect on these grocery bills being declined 4.5%. And that's the thing. Democrats were calling for this for a long time. Before this session even started, they were calling for possibly a reduction in grocery tax, even more, and looking for other avenues to cut taxes to actually benefit Oklahomans. They did. But I don't see them really, still, they don't really claim this. I don't see them really claiming this. There's really Governor Stitt that really is saying, hey, I did this, or I really pushed for this. And so because of that, because we're seeing Kyle Hilbert, the top GOP in the House, and we're seeing Governor Stitt, I mean, this was on November 25th, talking about Thanksgiving, bringing it back up, reminding people what you did for them. And so all the goodwill that comes from decreasing or having a tax up for groceries, it looks like it's going towards the Republican Party, not the Democratic Party, even though the Democratic Party had a hand in it. It was calling, and we're calling for it for a very long time. So now it still goes to the Republican Party. All that goodwill. And the next tweet was a repost from the AARP of Oklahoma. And was the retweet. It says right here, our partnership with the Oklahoma State Ag brings more digital hotspots to rural communities. The 2024 grant expands the program to 33 rural libraries, adding Bristow, Yale, and Shattuck. The hotspots help residents stay connected, access healthcare, and join community events. That was the post, and he retweeted it. Again, even if he had nothing to do with it, him reposting this, it plays on people's minds that he had something to do with this. I'm not saying he did or he didn't. All that to the side. Just saying him reposting this from the AARP of Oklahoma makes it seem as if he had a large hand in the people's minds, that he had a large hand in getting this completed. Again, another thing that the GOP did for working class Oklahomans, connected them to community events and to access healthcare. The longest time, I mean, healthcare was a Democratic policy of trying to reform healthcare. Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, same as Obamacare. But this right here, again, it makes it seem like the GOP is expanding access to healthcare and helping you get connected to community events. And here is another a post from him sharing an article from the Oklahoman. And this is what the post said. Well, first, let me click on the article. I can't because of the paywall. Love paywalls. And so basically, from what I can read of the headline says, Oklahoma is short on nurses. Here's how the state plans to train more nurses. And it says some other things. But here's what the post, the social tease of the post says by Kyle Hibbert. He says, this is great news for nursing students and for moving the needle in our healthcare workforce shortages. The legislature has made funding for nursing programs a high priority for the past 3 sessions. Kyle Hilbert, I'm terrible with names. Kyle Hilbert is a really good social media user as a politician. I can see that from just the very first couple of posts. I mean, bravo. I mean, that's all I can say about Hilbert. You're using social media to the best of your ability, and good job on you. That's going to really have a large effect to me. And again, some people might say, well, people are really looking at Hilbert's X account. Well, people do. I would say people in that district, in House District 29 that he is the representative of, they pay attention to this. They might not pay attention to this year round, but if you keep this up, every now and then they will check your social media accounts and they will see this and they see, oh, Hilbert's actually working on the behalf of us, District 29. And again, if you want to win these seats later on, if you want to set your district up or your party up to win the district that you're currently at, this is how you do it. Because eventually you're going to be term limited out in Oklahoma. But you show people that you're doing stuff for them. And then when somebody runs behind you, you endorse them. And all that goodwill, the vast majority of it, will go to that new candidate. So the GOP should really be thankful for Hilbert at this point in time. But now looking at Cindy Munson, who is the top Democrat in the House Minority Leader. And she is also a very good, in my point of view. Now, I might eat my words as we scroll through this, but I'm pretty sure from what I've seen in the past, she's a very good user of social media too. She says she's the leader of the Oklahoma House Dems, represents Oklahoma House District 85, and the first AAPI woman in the Oklahoma legislature. She's a runner, a rower, and a reader. And she provides her pronouns as well, she, her, in her bio. First post is congratulating 2 different representatives congratulating them on becoming, let me see here. Okay, just congratulating them on taking part of a Center for Advancement of Leadership Skills. All right. She congratulated Chancellor Sean. I'm terrible with names. That's one thing you're going to learn quickly about me. I'm terrible with names. Barrage, I believe that's how you pronounce it. Chancellor Sean Barrage congratulating this individual on becoming, a state region of higher education. Becoming the chancellor, chancellor, for the state regions. She also reposted another, I believe this is another rep, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, Ellen Hefner. She's our state representative for House District 87. Munson retweeted Hefner, who says recent pledges from the Trump administration threaten to erode many protections and supports currently in place for people with disabilities. That sentiment is being echoed at the state level. So basically retweeting saying that they believe federal education changes could threaten disability services, probably right here in Oklahoma. So again, yes, fighting on behalf of those downtrodden within our community, let's say. But at the same time, going against the Trump administration. Interesting how that would play together. Fighting on behalf of those with disabilities in Oklahoma, a very valiant effort, let's say, but also taking a really kind of a shot, I would say, at the Trump administration. Sometimes you do have to, differentiate yourself from the opposite party, from the Republican Party, and that is, Trump administration. That's the top of the Republican Party. It's going to be interesting to see how these play out because we know Trump is really well liked, might as well really well loved here in Oklahoma. So this is going to be interesting to see if these Democrats continue to push back against the Trump administration in almost every turn. Like when you announce a policy proposal or you're trying to safeguard certain individuals, do you attack the Trump administration at the same time? Or do you just say, hey, this policy at the federal level is threatening to do this? And do you just leave the Trump administration name out of it? It's possible. I doubt if we're going to get a very controlled message to judge that for ourselves because these Democrats and Republicans, vice versa, tend to be very well coordinated. And so I doubt if we're going to see a very instance where we're going to see maybe one person constantly talking about bashing Trump as a Democrat and one person not bashing Trump. We could see that. And I will try to find that because that'd be interesting. I will probably in these next couple podcasts get a running list of all the Democrat House and Democrat Republican members to look for the Twitter, for the X, the social media accounts, just to see, especially for the Democratic side, because Republicans is interesting, don't get me wrong, but they're already in majority. It's fun to see that underdog, the minority, really trying to claw back. So it's going to be interesting to see if the Democratic side here bashes the Trump administration, especially when they do believe one of his policies are going to negatively affect Oklahomans, or do they stay silent on the Trump administration and just focus on the policies themselves and try to explain to those, potential voters why this policy is wrong and not really try to bash Trump? Because when you bash Trump, to an extent, those Trump voters look at that as bashing them as well. And so I don't know if that is the way to win votes. Hefner, Munson, they're in pretty safe seats, I would say. It might not affect their district, but it might affect districts, let's say, in Southwest Oklahoma, because they see the leaders of the Democratic Party say that. And people tend to think all Democrats think alike and all Republicans think alike to an extent. So they might just place that on those Democrats running, let's say, in Southwest Oklahoma too. Here's another thing Cindy Munson says. This is a direct post by her on X. It says, forgive all student loans too. I believe this was in response to, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure this was tweeted right after President Biden pardoned his son, Hunter Biden. So she says, forgive all student loans too, and sponsor that. Plays well with the Democratic base, it does. Forgive all student loans too. But the Democratic base in Oklahoma, I would say, is quite different than the Democratic base on a nationwide scale. Anytime I see, at least from the KSWO perspective, anytime I really see us post a story about student loan forgiveness, we instantly get pushed back about how this is terrible, how it's just Biden was trying to buy votes. So I don't know how well that notion, that message of forgive all student loans too, it's going to play right here in the Sooner State, which tends to err a little bit more conservative. Or not even a little bit more conservative, vastly more conservative. Let's just not even sugarcoat it. But let's try to wrap up this podcast now, looking at the House GOP and that House Democratic Party. We have the House GOP. We don't see any posts in December, just in the very late November, November 30th, telling people to shop local this holiday season, Small Business Saturday. Again, plays well with the base. Small businesses is kind of Republican. If we're talking about issue ownership is the idea that certain parties do better with voters in certain issues. Doesn't mean a policies align, but it's just meaning that voters tend to view the party as the party that does better on those sorts of issues. As small businesses, people tend to assign the Republican Party to those issues. So again, playing up to that GOP base, again, that's all you need to do in Oklahoma. Now, I mean, if you're the Republican Party, all you have to do is play up the base. You don't have to win anybody outside your base now because you're vastly in the supermajority. So why do you need to upset that base anymore? You got a strong base, and you're just going to keep it. So you're just going to continue doing the messages that you basically have always done until you feel a little bit of pressure from the Democratic side. And they probably haven't felt pressure in a very long time from the Democratic side either. And just we see a lot of pretty much congratulating House members taking oaths of office and new House leadership, just letting people know who are the leaders of the GOP. On the Democratic side, let's see if we see anything differently. We see them congratulating Cindy Munson, receiving the Council of State Governments 20 Under 40 Leadership Award for 2024. Same thing for Swope and Hefner, congratulating them on doing certain things. For Thanksgiving, or I think this is the day after Thanksgiving, November 29th. I believe it was 28th Thanksgiving. I could be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure it is the day after Thanksgiving. They posted about Native American Heritage Day. It says Oklahoma House Democrats support tribal sovereignty and will continue to collaborate with tribal leaders to elevate their needs within the legislature. Hashtag Native American Heritage Day. And basically the picture right here says, honoring the rich cultures, contributions, and history of Native peoples in Oklahoma. The one before that, says Happy Thanksgiving. So again, trying to reach out to the tribes of Oklahoma. I don't think it's a bad thing. Which kind of raises a question in my eyes. I know Oklahoma has like the lowest voter turnout across all 50 states, but I wonder the Native American population in Oklahoma, how do they turn out to vote? Is it higher than normal than, let's say, their white or black counterparts, or is it lower than the other populations in Oklahoma? I'm actually going to look into that. And maybe bring that up on Wednesday. That'd be interesting to look into. So I'll try to look into that and bring that on Wednesday for the podcast. But yeah, that's pretty much all I generally see. See Happy Veterans Day. We don't really see too much messaging coming from this. We see a lot of, well, here we go. Now we found one on October 28th. It's a little bit of what it goes, but it says today, House Rep. Jason Lowe, Democrat out of Oklahoma City, conducted an interim study on mental health treatment in Oklahoma jails and explored the benefits of education and recreation for inmates' mental health. So again, trying to do some mental health treatments. I really want to do a focus study just to see how well these messages are pairing with the average day Oklahoman. Because mental health treatment is something that is on the minds of younger voters, I would say. Mental health is on the minds of younger voters. I don't know if it's on the minds of the older generation. And as we know, the older generation are vastly much more likely to turn to vote in every election. Older individuals I talk to don't really talk about mental health because it wasn't really talked about when they were, younger. So I wonder if that is causing some disconnect. Because yes, you want to reach the younger generation. You want to get those in your base. The younger generation are not the population. It's not the population that turns out to vote in every election. It's the older population. So I don't know if this is appealing to those voters who turn out in every election. But again, I don't know if that's their purpose. If this is that purpose to try to reach the most amount of voters, or is it just to good policy? But we always get back to that conundrum once more. You can have good policy, but if you're not in the majority to pass it, what is that good policy good for if it's not on the books? And I wonder if the more conservative of Oklahoma looks at this as being weak on crime. Because obviously, mental health treatment in Oklahoma jails and education and recreation for inmates' mental health, that's going to cost money. Doesn't mean it's not good policy, but it's going to cost money. And especially in times of when you have the governor of Oklahoma even saying that he wants to go to a path to zero for the income tax. That's you need money to do these things. And so they're probably going to get a lot of pushback from the Appropriations Committee, from those high up Republican politicians like Governor Stitt and Lonnie Paxton and the Speaker of the House for the GOP. You're going to get a lot of pushback saying all they want to do is spend money or they're weak on crime. And that's not going to do well for their image either here in Oklahoma. All right, so that will wrap it up today. So I'm going to stop the share on my screen. Let me stop it. So that was it. But if you have any requests, if you have any requests, feel free to email me, justin.rose@kswo.com. If you have any things you want to talk about or anything discussed, if you have any questions about Oklahoma politics or even national politics, we can talk about that on this podcast. I'd be happy to address it. Again, that's justin.rose@kswo.com. Feel free to email me. But I think that's it. I'll see you back here on Wednesday with a brand new episode of For the Record. I'm your host, 7 News political analyst Justin Allen Rose.